I didn't say a word when the HOA president wagged her finger in my face and told me my roses were being ripped out by force. I simply slid the county horticultural preservation letter across the table, stamped and signed, declaring my rose garden a protected heritage planting. Their lawyer read it, swallowed hard, and whispered something into her ear. Her smug expression melted like wax under a heat lamp. That was the last time anyone from that board told me what I could or couldn't grow on my own property. The irony is, I never set out to fight anyone. When I bought this place, it wasn't about prestige or appearances. It was about peace. After decades of working in the city, breathing exhaust and listening to sirens at night, I just wanted land that was mine, where the air was still clean and where nothing louder than a mourning dove interrupted the mornings. The little house came with a generous yard, and in that yard was a stretch of earth that seemed to call out to me. My grandmother had grown roses, and I remembered the smell of her yard on summer evenings, her hands covered in dirt as she trimmed blooms with quiet reverence. I wanted that, again, not just for myself, but as a way of honoring where I came from. So I planted. At first, just a few hybrid tea-soft pinks and whites lined neatly along the walkway. Then a climbing variety, blazing red, trained carefully along the fence. Eventually, I found an old grower who specialized in heritage roses, some varieties over 100 years old, preserved through careful grafting. I spent weekends building beds, layering mulch, and testing soil pH. The garden grew into something I was proud of, not ostentatious, not wild, just alive and full of color. Neighbors walking by would smile, sometimes stop to breathe it in. It gave me a sense of belonging, of ROTDNESS. That was, of course, before the HOA decided roses were unsightly. The first notice came taped to my door in bold block letters. Violation of HOA landscaping standards. Unauthorized plants must be removed. I thought it was a joke. The board president, a woman who seemed to believe her clipboard gave her divine authority, had previously complained about trash bins, mailboxes, and even a kid's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. But roses? Roses? I shook my head and tossed the letter in a drawer. Surely they had bigger concerns. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, another notice arrived, this time threatening daily fines until the non-compliant vegetation was gone. I called the number listed, hoping it was all just a clerical error. The secretary on the line put me on hold, came back with a rehearsed tone, and said, "The board has deemed your plantings inconsistent with community aesthetic standards." That phrase, community aesthetic standards, sounded like something out of a bad dystopian novel. I asked where, exactly, roses were forbidden. She couldn't answer. I wrote an email, polite, direct, asking for a clarification. The response I got back was curt. All visible landscaping must be board approved. That was news to me. The bylaws I'd signed at purchase said nothing of the sort. So I asked for a copy of the standards. They ignored me. Instead, they doubled the fines. It became clear very quickly this wasn't about roses. It was about control. The president lived 2 houses down. She had a yard of nothing but manicured turf, sprayed so often it smelled like chemicals even on breezy days. She saw my roses as a threat, not because they were ugly, but because they were beautiful in a way she couldn't dictate. At first, I tried diplomacy. I invited her to see the garden up close, explain the varieties, even mentioned the history tied to my grandmother. She smirked and said, "It's not personal." Rules are rules, but I knew it was personal. You could see it in her eyes, how much she hated that I had created something without her permission. That's when the letters escalated into threats of legal action. Neighbors, once friendly, grew quiet. One man whispered that the president had told them I was a troublemaker. Another admitted he'd been fined for leaving his truck parked on the street overnight, something nobody cared about until he defended my garden at a meeting. The board was making an example out of me. That's when I stopped trying to reason and started digging deeper. I pulled the HOS governing documents and read them line by line. Nowhere did it say roses were forbidden. Nowhere did it require prior approval for plantings, except in cases of major construction. What it did say, however, was that landscaping had to comply with county ordinances. So I looked up those ordinances. And that's when I found my leverage. It turns out my county has a horticultural preservation program and initiative started decades ago to protect historic and heritage plant varieties. Some of the roses I'd planted weren't just old, they were on the list. That meant they weren't just plants. They were considered part of the county's cultural heritage, and by law, they couldn't be removed without special authorization. The more I read, the better it got. The program wasn't optional. It carried legal teeth. Fines for unauthorized destruction ran into the tens of thousands, and in some cases, property owners could face civil liability. So I gathered everything, the preservation list, the deed to my property, photos of each variety, the receipts from the heritage grower, and the emails from the HOA. I made copies, highlighted sections, and built a binder thick enough to drop with a satisfying thud. Of course, I didn't just prepare legally. I documented everything. Every notice, every voicemail, every conversation. I even took photos of their own landscaping violations, the president's chemically scorched lawn, the treasurer's illegally widened driveway, the secretary's shed that was built without a permit. If they wanted a war over rules, I was going to show the battlefield. Then came the board meeting. I didn't speak first. I let them rattle on about known compliance, about fines stacking up, about legal action pending. They were puffed up, smug, certain they had cornered me. When the president finally said, "If you don't remove those roses, we will," that's when I calmly slid my binder across the table. Their lawyer opened it. His face shifted in real-time, confidence draining, eyes darting faster with each page. He whispered to the president. She tried to keep her composure, but her cheeks went pale. I leaned back, folded my hands, and waited. "You see," I said evenly, "these roses are part of the county's horticultural preservation program. They're legally protected. Any attempt to remove them is not just a violation of your own bylaws, it's a violation of state and county law. And unlike your fines, the penalties for that aren't optional. They're enforced in court." Silence. Thick, heavy silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every neighbor sitting in that room saw the shift, saw the board shrink into themselves. For months they had paraded their authority like a weapon. Now, in one quiet moment, it was gone. The aftermath was as predictable as it was satisfying. The fines disappeared, quietly rescinded without explanation. The lawyer stopped showing up to meetings. Within 6 months, the president retired from her position. The treasurer followed. The HOA, once so loud and domineering, grew quiet, almost invisible, and my roses, they bloomed. Year after year, they bloomed brighter than before. Neighbors who had once avoided me started stopping by again, asking questions, even taking clippings to start their own bush. The irony was almost poetic. The very thing the HOA tried to erase became the symbol of resistance against them. Now, when I walk through my yard in the evenings, the air heavy with the scent of roses, I think about how close they came to bulldozing not just flowers, but a piece of my history. And I think about how little they understood the ground they were standing on. They wanted conformity. What they got was law. These days they wave when I drive past. Some turn away, embarrassed. Either way, the garden grows, the house is quiet, and I no longer open my mailbox, dreading a notice. The color of roses, it turns out, is stronger than the wrath of any HOA.